My fingers are crossed today. But I'm very hopeful. 2 thumbs up, that's amazing.
Katie, we are streaming already, so it's all working.
That's awesome. Hello to YouTube. Hello, Sean. Thanks again for presenting today. We're so sorry about the cutout on Monday, but we're really glad you could come back.
That is, so, excuse me. That's okay. That wasn't your fault. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Will Karen be running the slides this morning?
Thumbs up. Okay, Karen, do you think we should get started? Good, okay.
All right.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us again today. Good morning and bom dia to all of you. Thank you very much for being back with us for the Brazil-US Oil Spill Response and Restoration Workshop. And welcome to those of you who might be joining us for the first time. We've had a very successful set of discussions regarding how Brazil and the US can continue our strong history of scientific collaboration, particularly in the field of oil spill emergency response, mitigation, and long-term restoration. We've spent the week together learning from each other and discussing ways in which we can form new research collaborations, strengthen existing partnerships, and define short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals for our cooperation. I think we also connected with new colleagues and friends from across our own countries throughout this process as well. I think we have been successful in making new connections, both in our own countries and across the ocean. And good morning to our followers on YouTube as well. We understand that we are streaming live, and we're excited that we're starting on time today. Apologies again for the delay on Monday. We appreciate all of you being here. And next, I would like to go over a few features of the Kudo webinar. You are probably familiar now with the webinar, but just in case you would like a refresher or if we have new folks, I'll go over a few tips before we get into it. Each participant will have access to open their video and microphone. And I think this is really important to note, especially during the discussion period. Everyone is welcome to request the floor. You will need to click to request the floor. It's not automatic that you can open your camera and microphone, but everyone is welcome to hit the request button and we will accept you. And we also very much encourage you to use the chat feature of the webinar. You will click on the button that says messages. And if you would like to message everyone, you can click participants. If you have a question regarding the technology, we also have an operator, Robert, who is with us today. Thank you very much to Robert. If you have a question for him, you can click technical support. You all should also have the option to send a private chat to anyone, and you'll see the list there. And I think most importantly, we're operating the webinar today in both English and in Portuguese. And you're very welcome to speak in either English or Portuguese today. You may also listen to the webinar in either English or Brazilian Portuguese. In the lower left-hand side, you will see a button that says floor. And if you would like to hear the meeting in Portuguese, you can go ahead and navigate to the drop-down menu and select Portuguese. If you select Portuguese audio, you will be hearing the meeting in Portuguese. If the speaker is speaking Portuguese, you will hear the original audio. And when someone switches to English, you will automatically hear the interpreter. So you won't have to take any further action. Just select your channel, and you can also change the channel at any time. It should be very easy. And if you are fluent in both languages, you are also welcome to select the floor channel, and you will just hear the original audio of the meeting. It will not be connected to the interpreter. So those are the three options today. And I want to say thank you again to our operator who is on the line. If you have any questions or need support, please feel free to send him a message. And I would also like to thank our interpreters again who are back with us today. So thank you very much to our interpreters. And finally, before we launch into the program, Karen and I wanted to make a special announcement. She and I have received several positive messages regarding your ideas for joint US-Brazilian projects. And so we've decided to announce today that we will be drafting a special US-Brazil joint statement to declare our intent to collaborate in oil spill science. NOAA and MCTI will originate the joint statement, and this will be a ceremonial document to celebrate our strong connections. And this is also feasible because of an agreement we have called the Science and Technology Agreement between the governments of the United States and Brazil. So we're excited to be utilizing that STA in order to really make a strong statement about our intentions to continue to work together, because we have received so much goodwill from everyone in continuing in this area. So we're very excited about that. And several breakout sessions. Really wanted to keep talking. I understand from a lot of the facilitators that the conversation could have gone on much longer. And we were really excited to hear that. That's exactly what we were hoping for. And I also wanted to thank Karen, because she sent us a message just yesterday saying that she would like to try to host us in Brazil for a follow-up workshop as soon as it would be safe to do so. So thank you so much to Karen. We were really thrilled about that offer, and I think everyone would be interested in signing up and possibly coming to visit you all in Brasilia and continuing these discussions, because we had so much in common and so much to talk about regarding joint projects. So we would really like to keep the momentum going. So thank you so much to you and to MCTI. So with that, I would like to introduce again Dr. Rowe. Sean Rowe is from Oregon State University and Oregon Sea Grant, and he will be speaking to us today about public trust in science and engaged practices. We're really excited that you could join us, and I see your slides are up and good to go. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody. The conversations on Wednesday were really great, as well as the presentations on Monday. And thank you for the opportunity to give the slides again. They were cut off earlier. I'm going to talk today about public trust and science and engagement, basically community engaged science, and what that, a couple of examples of what that looks like and why it's important. Especially when thinking about disaster resilience, disaster recovery, in particular oil spills in this case. I work for Oregon Sea Grant, which is a federal state partnership in every coastal state in the United States as well as territories. And we do research and we fund research on marine issues, but we also do outreach and engagement work as well as public education. My work is research on how people learn in those kinds of contexts. And that covers everything from citizen science kinds of projects, public participation in science projects, to museum going, to reading things on the internet, to attending scientist lectures and talks. It's a wide range of things that we work on. We also have partnerships with the INCT for public communication of science and technology at Fiocruz, where we are doing work on especially youth understanding of and engagement with science through public venues like museums. You can go ahead to the next slide. In 2020, the Pew Research Center released a report that's a redo of a report they've done about 3 times at this point, looking at, do Americans trust science, and in what ways do they trust science? And I think the good news for those of us in science communication is that almost 80%, 77% of Americans say they have some or a lot of trust in scientists to do what is right for the public. And in the terms of how this question is worded, these are scientists at large, so all sciences, but also publics at large. In the same study done internationally, 59% of Brazilians said the same thing, that they have a lot or some trust in science to do what is right for the public. There's other research that shows something very similar to the American number. About 80%, maybe a little more than 80% of Brazilians believe that science itself is trustworthy and useful for society. But we know that there's a lot of nuance to that, because we know that in the US in particular, there's a long-standing and very large debate about the value of science, a very public debate about the value of science and the trustworthiness of science. When you start to break it down to specific sciences, in this case environmental science, only 57% of Americans have a positive view of environmental research scientists and science. And since environmental research science encompasses the kind of science that we're talking about this week, I thought that was an important point to bring up. We don't have a similar number for Brazil. I'm guessing it's somewhat similar, that as you get into specific sciences, those numbers start to drop a little bit. And this largely has to do with trust and how we establish trust. And the ways we establish trust in science are not that different from the ways we establish trust in our everyday relationships. They have to do with our perceived authenticity. Are we being true to ourselves? Are we being true to our data? And are we being honest to our interlocutors? Are we being clear and honest and authentic to the people we're talking to? Those things go a long way toward establishing trust, especially in science communication. Can you advance one? Thanks. The fact, in order to build this trust, one of the most key ideas is that there needs to be some mutual benefit, and that if one party benefits at the expense of the other, whether it's the public or the science, then neither party can trust each other. So these beneficial relationships that come from engagement, from individual scientists engaging with public audiences, from lab groups engaging, from research projects and universities engaging with communities, are the things that foster trust in acceptance of scientific findings, but also in foster understanding of science and the scientific findings. And there's a big gap between acceptance of scientific findings and understanding of them. In the research on climate change, understanding in the United States, for instance, a lot of people are afraid of climate change, and they believe in climate science. But when you ask those same people to tell you about climate science, it turns out they don't understand it. They don't really have much knowledge that's correct. In fact, most of what they know is incorrect. On the other side, a lot of people who discount this climate science and who are vocal advocates for not trusting climate science actually understand the science pretty well in the same studies. And so there's this sort of bimodal relationship between trust on the one hand in science and belief in science and understanding of the science. Next slide, please. Community engagement or community-based engagement in scientific process is one of the key ways to build this trust and to build understanding. And in my work, we do research on recruitment and retention of adults into citizen science projects. And one of the things we've seen from looking at citizen science broadly over the years is that it really fulfills 4 needs related to kind of this mutually beneficial relationship between science and publics. And the first is, and we heard this on Monday and Wednesday and saw some examples of how to think about this in the Brazilian context, the need for baseline data. No matter how many graduate students you have, no matter how much remote sensing you have, there's just a lot of environmental data at local scales or even regional scales that can't be collected any other way than getting people on the ground to do it. And there's just not enough resources to send scientists, graduate students, undergraduate students, or remote sensing material and equipment out everywhere to get all the data that we need at the scales that we need it. Individual people in communities and individual and networks of these people are really good, efficient ways to collect monitoring data to build baselines. This has been shown over and over again. The real key is coming up with methodologies that are good, that are strong, and are robust, such that the scientists and the policymakers who receive the data can trust the data and understand how it was collected. You need that rigor. And adult citizen science can provide that rigor. It's been shown several times in large-scale projects. This leads to the second kind of need that gets fulfilled, that citizen science fulfills really well, which is long-term ecological monitoring. And in order to have this kind of relationship with the community that leads to long-term ecological monitoring, it really is about the community having a feedback loop from the science and the science having a feedback loop from the community, such that they're constantly understanding why the need persists and why the data has to be collected in certain ways, and then where it goes and what happens to it. If communities don't see that what they're doing is valuable to the scientific enterprise, they will stop doing it. Simultaneously, if they don't see that it's valuable to the community, they'll stop doing it. They got better things to do in some sense. But when it's done right and when it's done in an engaged way, it can lead to some really great results relative to long-term ecological monitoring. And again, we need people to do this in many cases, and we don't have the resources to train enough scientists to do it. It's a good reason for turning to participants from publics. A third need, which I think came up very clearly in our conversations on Wednesday, is that especially in the face of disaster and in the aftermath of disaster, whether it's an oil spill or an earthquake, a tsunami, and a hurricane, there's a huge need for trained volunteers and local communication networks. If you're trying to communicate science to a large body of people in a local area, you can send scientists out to give talks, that's important, but sometimes you need people on the ground who are trusted brokers of information. And for better or for worse, local people are often much better at that than scientists or than extension agents from universities, or especially government agents or NGOs. A citizen science network can provide that network of trained volunteers who can be called on in an emergency, in a disaster, both to collect different kinds of data than they have been collecting. We trained up quickly to do that, but also to communicate out to the rest of the community what's going on, what we know about it, what's happening, how they can get involved, what they need to know. There's not a lot of great examples of this out there, but one of the ones that we've looked at ourselves, we work with a project that does seabird surveys. So they look for carcasses of dead birds from California through Alaska monthly, about 1,500 volunteers doing this on about 1,700 beaches. And several years ago, we had a problem on the West Coast of sea star wasting disease, where sea stars were simply falling apart, liquefying in the environment, and nobody really knew why, or there wasn't much baseline data about this, and there wasn't much opportunity to collect ongoing data. Two different networks of existing social scientists were called in and trained up quickly to do the data collection for creating baseline data and monitoring the spread of this disease along the West Coast, providing a lot of great data that would have otherwise been very difficult to get in the short run to address this question that was actually leading to a lot of public concern and an interesting scientific conundrum. These two networks kind of sprung into life, if you will, to provide the data that was necessary. It's my understanding and belief that if you're working with communities already, and Rui showed a great example of the long-term mapping project they're trying to develop, and Priscilla talked about it on Wednesday as well a little bit, that this becomes a resource in case you need to collect a different kind of data for a different purpose that from a problem that emerges. And then the last need I'm going to mention here today is the transparency of methods, and this goes the other way. The public needs to understand, they don't need to understand research methods completely, but in order to have some trust in them and to trust the outcomes of the science, they like to understand, they like to be able to see how it works. And when you have people, individual people, regular people from communities who are going out and collecting data using a scientific protocol, this creates a level of transparency in how we do science and in the scientific enterprise that's really hard to recreate any other way. We know that if we want our students to learn to do field work, we have to send them out to do field work. If you want the public to understand how field work works, the best way to do it is to send them out to do field work. Can you advance the next slide? Individual citizen science programs are important. And community observers are hugely important. And I think we heard also about that on Monday and Wednesday. But when you can harness, again, these individual projects and programs and even individual people into a community of practice or a network of citizen scientists, then you really have an opportunity to understand large-scale system-wide changes. And one of the best examples of that is the community-based monitoring effort, the Atlas of Community-Based Monitoring effort that comes out of the Circumpolar Research Initiative. The Changing Arctic project, and you can see the funders on this is from their website, sort of identifying where there are specific projects collecting data in a more or less systemic fashion manner, and sharing that data through a shared portal. This network, which has grown over the last almost 20 years at this point, to include community elders in indigenous communities, scientists at universities all over the region, all over the world actually, classrooms and students, K-12 classrooms and students, primary and secondary, as well as everyday people collecting data on what they observe in their environment every day, has made a huge difference in creating an understanding of the pace of change in the Arctic, but also the human effects of change in the Arctic. That is, how does this affect my community, your community, individual communities around the region? And this public health and wellness and even socioeconomic data, as we also heard on Monday, is the hardest kind of data to get baseline on, and some of the hardest kind of data to collect, especially in a disaster context or a pandemic context like we have now. And so having a network already in place of people who are doing ecological monitoring and can add on or include in that their personal data, their personal perspective, the perspective of boots on the ground, makes a huge difference in being able to activate baseline data, create baseline data about the impacts on societies, on culture, on economies, and on individuals, their psychological well-being from large-scale systemic change. Next slide, please. The last thing I want to mention is that another kind of network, we talked about this on Wednesday as well, are professional networks like the Sea Grant Network in the United States. This is the Mississippi, Alabama, Florida group that was largely responsible for communicating about the effects of the Deepwater Horizon, the Sea Grant Oil Spill Science Outreach Team. And these are scientists, extension faculty, and communicators from multiple states, multiple programs in the region coming together over the long term to share information among universities, share information between universities and agencies, federal and state, but also share information with the public and bring information back from the public to the science. They're supported by the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative, so funding that came from the Deepwater Horizon, as well as the state sea grants that are already in place. And if you go to the next slide, this is simply one example of the kinds of things they did in response. You can advance one. Thanks. Thanks to Steve for providing the last two slides. These were seminars and talks that that group gave during the Deepwater Horizon disaster. I put it up not to say, look how many people they reached, but to show this is an entire region. This is a very large region in the United States, very populated region in the United States. And each one of these spots is available as a node in the network because of the Sea Grant or the existing network of professional communicators and scientists working together to engage public audiences. So putting these kinds of networks in place, not necessarily to respond to disasters, but just to work and engage communities in marine sciences and ocean sciences can have huge benefits down the line, especially in the face of a disaster. And I think the last slide is just my thank you slide, and I'll end with that. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rowe. Your presentation was so interesting and really touched on a lot of really important points, from trust in science to citizen science and community-based monitoring, and finally the importance of networks. So we're very happy to hear from you today. I think we might have time for just one or two questions. If anyone has a question, please feel free to request the floor to speak, or you could also put your question in the chat. We'll also have a lengthy discussion period today, so you're welcome to raise any questions during that time as well. Okay, I think hearing none, we can go ahead and move on to the next session, which will be our reports from day 2 from the wonderful discussions that took place on Wednesday. And Terry Schaefer will be our moderator for the next session. So thanks again to Sean, and thank you to Terry, who will be taking over the floor for the next section.
Well, thank you, Katie. Can everybody hear me? Great. All right, bom dia, good morning. You know, I was reflecting back on Wednesday. I had the opportunity to sit in on and attend one of the breakout sessions, and it really was a pleasure because the level of sharing and discussion and just pure enthusiasm was really really impressive. And you know, it seemed to me, as Katie had reiterated this morning, that I think the conversation could have gone for several more hours. And there was a real desire to have an opportunity to continue the conversation. And I think with Karen's offer of hosting a workshop in Brasilia at some point in the future, we're going to have that opportunity. But it certainly doesn't mean we can't continue to have our conversations offline as we move forward, now that new relationships hopefully have been made. So first of all, thanks to everybody for participating in the breakout sessions on Wednesday, and special thanks to the rapporteurs who had to do all the note-taking and helping with develop those presentations that we will be seeing. The way this will work is we'll have the presentations. They can be up to 20 minutes by the rapporteurs. This includes time for comments from any of the participants that may want to add something to the presentation. And then we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. Katie will let me know when the questions come in, and the way you submit your questions is in the messages. You go ahead and submit your question in the message, and Katie will alert me to that, and she'll read out the question. And then either the rapporteur or anybody who was on in the group can respond to that. First up, Mauricio, and I apologize if I'm not getting the pronunciation correct, Namakawa from INPI, and Ivanis Pita from the University of Miami were the rapporteurs for the first breakout group on socioeconomic impacts, communication science, dissemination, citizen science. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Bom dia a todos. My name is Ivanis Pita. I'm one of the rapporteurs of Breakout Group number 1. Laércio Namikawa is also a rapporteur of this group, as it was said previously. The group was entitled Monitoring, Modeling, and Forecasting of Oil Dispersion and Control Strategy. I also would like to acknowledge the work of our facilitators, Marlo Góes and Angelo Lemos, who put the presentation list together and guided a really productive and interesting discussion during our meeting. Karen, you can move to the next slide, please. Today's presentation we outlined in 3 parts. Firstly, I'll talk briefly about the structure of Wednesday meeting. After that, I'm going to provide some immediate action items that the group judged necessary, like defining work groups for a better flow and organization of the activities, define short, medium, and long-term priorities, focusing on the collaboration of institutes and universities from both Brazil and United States. And the group also support the creation of a long-term engagement joint project, and also find ways of improve the communication between parts. Finally, in the last section, we are going to mention the possible creation of 3 different task teams, focusing on the implementation of a unified oil detection system, achieve unified communication and data management between both nations, and create a forecast and oil track system. You can go. Thank you. Our facilitators divide the meeting in 3 main themes, where we could separate the discussion in terms of monitoring, modeling, oil dispersion, and the last theme was what we call interface, which is related to how communicate our findings and conclusions to the general public, and more specifically to the decision makers. The wide and diverse teams of experts that gave us talks in the first part of the breakout group was composed by Paulo Nobre, Joaquim Trianes, Gustavo Goni, Matt Clark, Rafael Santos, João Lorenzetti, and Carlos Lentini. The topics of the talks included oil detection and oil characterization, ship detection, data availability, and in situ observations as well. The second part of our meeting was focused on modeling efforts, where the experts Vili Kaurafalou, Mathieu Lehenoff, Robert Hallberg, and Emmanuel Giarola presented their works using oil dispersion models, showing the importance of river on regulating the dispersion of oil from oil spills occurring in areas in the vicinity of major rivers. And they also talked about ocean atmosphere couple models and exchange details of data simulation. The last part of presentation from Ben Shore from NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration, where he introduced IRMA, which is a data management and visualization software focused on environmental response applications. The group also shared ideas and lessons learned about citizen science, which is really important and brings the local community closer to the scientific community. And there are also thoughts about how to improve the communication of the results. Next slide, please, Karen. Moving now to action items, which are points of extreme importance to enable this collaborative group to move forward and obtain positive results. The group identified 4 main areas of immediate focus, which are define working groups, establish short, medium, and long-term priorities for collaboration, elaborate long-term projects with joint engagement, and create effective communications venues, which as Karen and Katie just mentioned before, we're really happy with the announcement that you guys gave. So we're really happy with that. Karen, you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. The first action item is to define working groups and task teams for future research and operations. This would be focused on ship and oil detection in case there is an oil spill at the ocean surface, as the one that occurred in 2019 in Brazil, the Brazilian coast. Also couple ocean atmosphere modeling, because it's vital to understand the local environment and also which variables are important in the case of an oil spill here in the South Atlantic. And another example is obviously to work on oil dispersion modeling to be able to analyze which areas would be more impacted by an eventual oil spill, and also to perform backtracking techniques given present conditions to be able to state where was the location of the oil spill. Karen, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. Moving now to short-term priorities for this Brazil-US collaboration. We could state the utilization of GNOME modeling system for Brazilian institutions. GNOME stands for General NOAA Operational Modeling Environment, and it's a set of modeling tools for predicting the fate and transport of pollutants such as oil when spilled in water. Another short-term priority is to use data analytics applied to modeling and monitoring the communications from different sources. For medium-term priority, we have the development of intelligent algorithm for ship and oil detections, mainly from satellite imagery, which would improve the detections of false positive case and speed up a possible investigation, for example. And this could also implement a pre-screening process on this altimetry data, so we could have some processing time, and we could save some processing time and obtain a more concise list of areas of interest to study for determined topic. Another midterm priority is the development of regional ocean atmosphere and biochemistry modeling system using MOM6, which is also an open source model developed by NOAA, and has a tracer subcycling sorry. And MOM6 also has a tracer subcycling time stepping scheme that allows for an efficient incorporation of many biochemical variables. So it's really important for oil spills study cases. For long-term priorities, we could list the development of a constellation of smart satellites for ocean monitoring systems, since remote sensing is a relative affordable method of data acquisition and really important for oil and ship detection specifically. The group also envisioned the development of a quick deployment of autonomous observation device systems to provide accurate local conditions for initial response actions. You can move to the next slide, please. Moving on to long-term engagement joint projects between US and Brazil. The group encouraged the development of a joint in situ and satellite data simulation, a simulation geared for ocean prediction. For in situ examples, we could cite the Pirata Moored Buoy Array and Smart Drifters program. A cooperative joint long-term unified prediction system and also a satellite program of ocean observation are suggested by the group as well, and were discussed in the Wednesday meeting. And finally, the availability of long-term educational resource and overall capacity building, which with an improvement of tools, equipment, and diverse personnel that's needed. Next slide, please. The next action item refers to communication venues, where the creation of a scientific steering committee, definition of meetings and workshop schedules, and the creation of software and website management projects would contribute to the improvement of the communication between the scientific community in both US, United States of America, and Brazil, and also from a communication from the scientific community to the general public. Next slide, please. In the last part of this brief presentation, we are going to show the topics that we believe to be relevant for the creation of task teams, which are the development of a unified oil detection system, the development of a unified communication and data management system, and the elaboration of a forecast and oil track system. Next slide, please. The oil detection system, should be based on the detections of anomaly, which are the starting point of the identification of oil in the ocean. And the team should merge efforts to combine near real-time satellite products as well as in situ data projects such as Pirata, buoys, research crews, drifters, and ship of opportunities like fishing boats, Navy vessels, and Coast Guard, etc. and also keep track of marine debris, since the particle size has proven to be very important on the determination of the dispersion path. Also, cloud computing is really important for sharing different data sets easily between US and Brazilian institutions and universities. Next slide, please. In order to obtain the development of a unified communication and management system, we have to bring the local community to be an active player of these projects by collecting and validating data from audiovisual products, for example, such as photos, short videos, and reports. The team should also be able to provide a fast response to accidents and disasters. For example, to indicate an area whose efforts should be concentrated and which actions should be made for each specific scenario. In this case, the oil spill scenario. The definition of best uncertainty communication practice would be beneficial for a better understanding between the scientific community and the decision makers, and also the data analytics should be applied to modeling observations from different sources, and the improvement of the tools, equipment, trained personnel, and installations should be envisioned, as well as cloud computing for a more efficient data sharing between US and Brazil, just like the previous task team. Next slide, please. The third and last task team would focus on implementing a forecast and oil tracking system. This would consist on using MOM6-based global and regional coupled modeling systems, as well as develop a multi-model ensemble system for the Americas, which would be scalable, adaptable, and computationally optimized. This way we could use the maximum efficiency for existing and updated computer power as well. The team should encourage the sharing of ideas and suggestions for the implementation of an operating system for forecasting and oil dispersion at the sea. This is a really important topic to share the knowledge between us. That's the reason that we're here talking today. We can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to thank all the participants of the Breakout Group number 1 for the vivid and high quality discussion that we had this Wednesday. Thank you so much for everything. Next slide, please. And also thank you for the organization of this workshop. Thanks, Carrie and Katie, for the excellent support provided and for the opportunity given for the scientific community to speak up. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. First of all, I need to apologize for reading the presentation incorrectly. I was trying to have you give the presentation that Dr. Rowe gave again, so my apologies for that. All I can say is I think you've set the bar pretty high. I'm going to be very interested to see how the other working groups do. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. You set the bar pretty high. I mean, the level of action items that you've come up with, both short, medium, and long term, the establishment of working groups and task teams, very, very impressive and very, very ambitious. And I really wish you all the best in moving forward on that. And we certainly want to see this move forward and watch as this progresses. And hopefully we can hear about any updates on as this moves forward, especially as we gather again in Brasilia. All right, so at this point, I would invite any comments from any of the participants that were in this group, and then we can also have questions come in. So, are there any comments from the participants before we jump into the questions? Hearing none. Okay. Katie, do we have any questions coming in?
Yes, we have a couple of questions and comments. First, I would like to invite Professor Rita to take the floor if she would like to do so. She has a very interesting and important comment, I think. In the chat, I'm also happy to share that if you would prefer.
Eu posso falar. Eu posso falar. Eu posso falar.
I can speak. I wanted to say that I really like the presentation. I think there's a lot of connection with what we think about this process. But I want to make a suggestion that managing disaster in Brazil, we should have leaders from the communities, from the fishing communities. And for these communities to be part of the process, they could, for example, be invited to this seminar. Because fishing communities, I mean, I work closely to them. They are putting forward tools to monitor in the long, short, and midterm, and they have very few resources. I think the Commission, the CPP, and also the movement of artisanal fishermen, MPP, and Country, which is the confederation of the reserves, should be present of these committee. In this committee, these are very committed to follow. So I defend that MEC should talk to these groups with no intermediation. And the sort of fishing that we have at this instruction has been an important element for modeling local communities to protect the fishing areas in Brazil. So for me, saying something I want to say something that nothing can be efficient for them without their presence. They have to participate, basically.
No, in Miami. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Venice. I just wanted to add, maybe it is embedded in the summary that Venice gave. And I believe that something very important that is a long hanging fruit is that we should make probably an assessment or an evaluation of what assets are already in place that from joint projects that Brazilian institutions and NOAA or other US government institutions are currently carrying out that could be used for the goal of oil spill monitoring and environmental monitoring related to oil spill that that could be a very good first step. Some of those assets are already in place. The partnerships are already in place. They will have to maybe be modified a little just to address the objectives of oil spill and ocean environmental conditions related to oil spill. That's the only thing I wanted to add that maybe could be included in the action items. And I was part of the group. Sorry, I didn't get to contribute, but it was a very productive call that we had on Wednesday. And thank you, Venice and Marlos, for coordinating that. Thank you.
Katie, do we have any other questions or comments?
We do have a couple of more questions. First, I see that Paulo Nobre would like to make a comment, so I would like to invite Dr. Nobre to take the floor.
Thank you, Katie, Terry, and colleagues. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. And Terry, let me say we must be realistic and visionary. And we have been done it with you guys at NOAA, with the Pirata project. In the beginning, a few people believed that we could. So if something is really innovative, number one, the other people around you must believe that it's not possible. And I would like just to bring you one example of this. The parachute of the NASA rover in Mars has a color code, as I read, say, dare the impossible. So face the impossible. And so our ideas are having the partnership with NOAA and Brazilian institutions is twofold. One is to be realistic, to be able to deliver information when it is needed. Two, have the courage to envision the future and to the information that comes from fishermen and from scientists. So without much ado, thank you very much. The Pirata project is a trademark of that we can do if we do it together. And the together here is very important. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Paul. Very, very important.
Can I give a quick comment too?
Yes.
Yes. First, thank you everybody for Katie and Karen for the organization. And yeah, just to address a little bit of the previous 2 points, I want to add that we included just a little sentence on including fishing boats and everything on the monitoring of the spill. And I think forward what Rita and Sean said before, I think this is very important for the citizen science part of the mechanism of the structure of the system. And I want to give one example, for example, for the red tide that we have in the west coast of Florida, where a lot of fishermen, they're there and they're the first one to detect if there's algal bloom and to collect samples. And there's a NOAA partnership with that is very important for NOAA and for the whole community of Florida. And I think that's a very good point. And the point that Gustavo made on first, one of the action items we could include is maybe to list all the projects that are already going and to be able to build on this existing project instead of proposing something that is very new, or sometimes we have already something going on. We can scale that up for a joint effort. So these are my 2 cents here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Looking at time,
sorry.
do we go ahead?
Sorry to interrupt you. I just forgot to mention that we could not do anything that we are dreaming if we didn't have the Navy, the Brazilian Navy support. So the Brazilian Navy are absolutely a partner in Pirata and in all these things that we will do with NOAA to consider the Center for Hydrography. So because we are brief, we are not forgetting. So it's important that not mention is not meaning not participating. That let me tell you that this workshop has contributed enormously to put the Brazilian team, the Brazilian partners working together. And this is a tremendous benefit coming out of this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's a good point. I think we have time for one more comment or question, and then I think we probably need to move on, or we're going to be extremely over schedule.
Please, could I add a comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to thank Ivanis for his summary. It was very nice. And I'm going along the words that Paulo has just mentioned now, and also Marlos, to build over what we have already implemented as a Brazilian infrastructure. So this is just a reminder that the Brazilian Navy has an operational system, ocean forecasting short-range operational system that has been running for about 10 years. And now we have a very nice data assimilation system that assimilates SST, sea level anomaly, and Argo TS profiles. And we do a simulation twice a week. And this forecasting system is produced daily with NOAA's support, because we use the global forecasting system from NOAA to force our ocean forecasts. So I'd like just to remind that we should now build, counting on with this system that is already under operation to be used for the oil spill trajectories and all the other applications that ocean forecast can produce. So just to mention that we have already some infrastructure that cannot be neglected in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think we're going to probably need to move on. If there are other questions, we can capture those in the messages, and then we can get those maybe forwarded to the group so that they can answer any questions that might be relevant to them. So next up is Joe Naughton from my office in NOAA. And he's going to give a presentation on Breakout Group 2. We'll get the title right this time, Biotechnology Related to Response and Mitigation of Oil Spills. And Joe, I invite you to take the floor.
Fantastic. Thank you, Terry. And can I just confirm that you're able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you again. Hello, everyone. Good morning and bom dia todos. My name is Joe Naughton, and I will be presenting on behalf of Breakout Group 2, which was biotechnology related to response and mitigation of oil spills. And I also just want to thank all of our participants for such a lively discussion and reiterate Katie's and Terry's points that our group definitely could have continued conversation well past noon. And so thank you very much for that. I am going to just kind of provide a high-level overview of what we all talked about, and then I will encourage others from our breakout group to really chime in and offer a little more info, as well as any questions from the group. And so I did my best to really aggregate all of the really robust discussion into 4 overarching themes. And so what I identified here is biotechnology, and this was really kind of the meat of the discussion and more kind of technical topics. And then we also talked about bioeconomy, and so looking at economic activities or impacts that involve the use of biotechnology, as well as biomass and other materials. Also looking at the impacts on biodiversity with respect to this angle of biotech. And then lastly, overarching citizen science. And this really looks at how to better engage with coastal communities and really better the knowledge exchange and information sharing between the researchers and those kind of living in the communities, like was talked about in many other earlier presentations. So I'm going to walk through each of these and kind of talk about some topics that were discussed for each, as well as several of the knowledge gaps and some research questions that we found that might serve as a stepping stone for some future collaboration. And so first, looking at biotechnology, again, a little bit more of the meat of the discussion and a little more technical, but some key topics I have listed here. Biosurfactants was a common topic, how they can aid in bioremediation and ecotoxicity of both bio-based dispersants and absorbents. Molecular modeling was a common topic, and specifically looking at dispersion and adsorption. Also, techniques to characterize dispersed phase specifically of oil spills. Then lastly, this is a common theme in many technological difficulties, is this continuous monitoring with sensor networks and satellites and kind of the data sharing in terms of that. And so next, looking at knowledge gaps, thinking about biological alternatives to replace these chemical dispersants was a common topic discussed, and some really great conversation there. But also the use, effectiveness, and shelf life of biosurfactants. And so we talked about how some of these chemicals and products and materials are sitting around kind of waiting for an emergency to happen, and what does that mean as we start to look at different products going forward. So next, looking at the topic of bioeconomy, and again, what this means for economic impacts with the use of integrating these biotechnologies that we have talked about. And so two kind of overarching topics that kind of lead into each other, thinking about private sector engagement and how to engage some of these industries and groups, but also what this means for commercial development and commercial products and how we can better engage that. And so some knowledge gaps here, and again, this was a really big one, is we talked about the production gap. So how do we transition from what we know in the lab at this smaller scale and transitioning to this product to a low cost and available that can make an impact. And so kind of leading on that as well, a gap is the number of products that are registered has presented a barrier, and we wanted to talk more about that. Next, touching on biodiversity, two kind of, again, overarching thoughts here. One topic was the characterizations of microbiota, and specifically we had talked about how this looks in entrained oil on coastal rocks, but also other coastal communities. And some specific gaps here are, for one, biodiversity hotspots, continuing to identify those, but also harnessing biodiversity and what that looks like in the aftermath of a oil spill, and what types of technologies and other scientific findings we can use to kind of enhance that. And then lastly, I will touch on citizen science, and this was another very common topic, and some points I have noted here, thinking about strategies to raise awareness and really connect, again, these researchers. We had talked about how we sometimes can throw our research at these communities, and how can we better kind of integrate some of this science, and really this leads off a lot of the great talk from earlier that kicked off today's talk, is relying on these communities, better integrating the local knowledge into some of these discussions is really important. And so next, looking at kind of better understanding of response and remediation protocols and techniques. Again, this idea of knowledge and information exchange, and then response and remediation protocols and techniques. And I think a better understanding from both the researchers, but again, also the communities, and that conversation between them both is really important. And so we had this overarching knowledge gap of how do we better translate this science and work with these local communities. Next, we'll dive into some overarching lessons learned. And first and foremost, we talked about the need for exploratory research and how this can be critical, especially in the long term, and how we need to, moving to my second point, we need this continued collaboration and lessons learned from both short-term and emergency response, and how that transitions to long-term response. And so this idea for exploratory research was really great. And then lastly, this kind of big idea also, which I appreciate, is this new clean energy maintenance. And so thinking environmentally friendly, renewable bioenergy, but really what does that mean and how does that integrate? But again, some of these big ideas, which were really interesting to walk through. Next, there were several opportunities for collaboration noted, and I just kind of threw some here, but they came from both academic institutions who were involved in our conversations, but also government programs like the Sea Grant here in the US, but also in Brazil, and other government agencies who can help kind of connect these dots. And so this include potentially sample exchanges. This can be continued research on the fate of oil specifically, and thinking about fieldwork and data exchange, I think was pretty hit home, and how researchers and whatnot continue to kind of, I guess, set the stage and open the door for some potential future fieldwork down the line. Also including sabbatical visits, but maybe thinking more long-term, can in a program specifically for marine biotechnology be an opportunity, and what would that look like going forward? And then lastly, the need for more funding opportunities from both countries. And so we had talked about a couple times what that looks like in terms of both solidifying the research, but also what is the logistics in terms of getting that approval to actually partner with country governments and agencies and universities, and what that means for academics, but also for those involved with government work and the like. And so wrapping up, I'll say there's a couple of key takeaways here. For one, biological alternatives for dispersants and the need to scale up production were two just major topics that were touched on heavily. And I would encourage others to really speak to what they had talked about after this presentation. And then this idea to identify opportunities to fund research exchanges. So this not only means the opportunity to engage, but also what does that look like logistically, and can it be done and how? And that then leads to, well, can we map out these resources and facilities? Who do we know that is doing what? Who has potential overlap? Who could continue to work together on these issues? And what would that look like? And then lastly, coordinating communication. So obviously there was a lot to talk about, a lot was talked about, and a lot more needs to be talked about. And so can we continue to, there was a lot of connections made in email exchanges. How do we keep that going? And can we continue to do that going forward? And so lastly, I'll just thank all the great participants again, a breadth of both universities and government agencies and the like. And I just want to thank everyone for their participation. It made our job easy to really facilitate and take notes when there's so much conversation. So thank you all for that. And then I will just open it up for comments from my group, but also questions from anyone who may have.
Thank you, Joe. As Joe said, we'll be taking any comments from the group, and then we'll take questions. I just want to say, Joe, thank you for the really comprehensive presentation. I like the emphasis on the citizen science. That seems to be a recurring theme already. Looking at the taking what I would call a stock take, and some of the takeaways you had about really looking at resources, assets, identifying protocols, and identifying what might be available to help facilitate your work moving forward. So well done, and let's open it up to the floor. And Katie, I guess you're monitoring the messages, but if there's anybody who wants to try to take the floor, I guess they can request that.
So far, we have a comment from Van Dijk, who said, I understand that bioeconomy and citizen science have strong linkages, and we need to have useful information to the people, including on productive and sustainable topics, but also on environmental, food, and social security. And he had a follow-up as well. Van Dijk, I'm wondering if you would like to take the floor and share your question with us further. I also see that Fabiano is on the floor with us. Van Dijk, if you would like to request the floor and expand, please go ahead. In the meantime, I would like to toss it over to Fabiano quickly.
We cannot hear you, Fabiano. He may have froze up, it looks like.
You're welcome to share your comment with us in the chat as well. You may also need to click allow permission for Kudo to use your microphone. Fabiano, while you connect your mic, I would also just like to share a comment from Vanya, who said, I would like to declare the excellent opportunity to identify partners, and that we have already started a conversation with Dr. Vijay John. I believe that this will be the beginning of a fruitful collaboration, but as was mentioned, we need to identify how these collaborations will be made possible. Thank you for your comment, Vanya. Oh, I think we heard you for a moment. Could you speak again, Fabiano?
Hi, can you listen, Katie?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks. So, good morning, everyone. Dr. Schaffer, Dr. Karen. Joy, congratulations for the presentation, and thank you very much. It was a very precise presentation. There are just two comments I would like to register. The first one is that in the joint statement between Brazil and the US, it seems to us very timely to address the reef biodiversity, and particularly in areas where oil exploration is to begin, like the Great Amazon reef that was discovered recently. And both the Brazilian and the US oil companies want to explore oil in these regions. And if it's possible, I'm not sure if it's possible, but this is a kind of hotspot of biodiversity and playground for marine biotechnology. That's my first suggestion for the evaluation of Dr. Karen Kopp and the rest of the team in the US. Second, very quickly, I just would like to register that we have had programs with the US in the past, with the NSF, with the Moore Foundation, with the US Department of Education. We exchanged over 50 people back and forth to San Diego and to Boston, to the best universities in the cities. And the US citizens also came to Rio de Janeiro. By the way, you might consider to make this meeting not in Brasilia, but in Rio, the wonderful city of Rio. You are invited. Yeah. Just think about. And finally, we also have collaboration together with the Navy, the Brazilian Navy, and the Office of Naval Research in the US with our colleagues over there. And more recently, we opened avenues of conversation with NOAA researchers, and we are looking forward to these new collaborations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for those very, very important comments. I also appreciate the invitation to Rio, but that's going to be up to folks beyond just me. So anyway, Katie, do we have another question?
We do. I would like to invite Dr. Roy Kikuchi to take the floor next. Thank you. Please feel free to open your microphone and camera.
I think I have a problem of connection. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Thank you, colleagues, Karen. I just want to build on one comment that Dr. Schaefer made about citizen science and communication, which is a recurring subject. I think that very probably this is a cross subject, that is a subject that will cross every group, so that I think that we might think about making a general group that will connect everyone, and maybe build on NOAA's experience on outreach to learn from your experience on this, and maybe reproduce or build something new for us here, right? And just food for thought. Okay. Thank you.
Those are excellent suggestions. We should keep that for. We should consider that opportunity. I know Sea Grant, of course, is that expertise is kind of built into the model in Sea Grant, and so it's a very important asset to what they do in terms of working with the communities. So, Katie, do we have another question? Or we're getting close to break time as well, so maybe one more question.
I think those are all of the questions from the chat. Unless anyone else would like to take the floor, you're welcome to do so.
Poderia falar? Bom dia.
May I speak? Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. This is good morning, Dr. Katie, Dr. Karen, Dr. Terry. This week has been very fruitful with you. I really like the presentation by all the groups, especially that by Dr. Joe. for Group 2 that I was part of on Wednesday. So building on Dr. Joe's comments, you talked about adopting biotechnological products, but what we see with this spill that we had in 2019, that we didn't know anything about the spill. So adopting protocols and putting in place protocols immediately in the case of spill makes all the difference so that the damage is smaller. So what do you think uh, about one of the topics and items that you presented for discussion? What do you think about having biotechnological products being more popular? I'm saying this because as I presented on Wednesday, we already developing some of these products and we've had great success in removing oil that would get to mangrove and to rocks in our beaches. Of course, this was a very small context, a very small scale because we were actually producing it only in the lab and not in big scale, industrial scale. But I ask you, from your experience, in terms of the other skills that we had worldwide, like in the United States too, is there this possibility of having like high scale production for this biotechnological product so that this could be adopted by a protocol? Thank you very much.
Well, Joe or anybody from the group want to tackle that question?
Unfortunately, I think it cut out a little for me, but I would definitely direct to anyone else in my group to please.
If there's anybody in the group that
Hello. Oh, sorry, I didn't know how to talk.
no, go ahead. We hear you fine.
This is not so clear to me, the further development that we have here, but I think that there are a lot of researchers that may have separate places to arrange future plans. I just informed here on the chat that I sent an email to Sean, to Liesel, and to Helen. But other partners are also welcome to begin to discuss how to develop further research after the huge input that you promoted here. I think that we need to think on the coastal communities differently, the way that we think on the open ocean environment. We need large boats. We need the Navy participate on this research, but at the coast, there are lots of problems. And the oil, when arrived to the coast, there was the huge media access to the problem because people was affected. So to make all the efforts of all knowledge that people have here on the oceanography, climatology, ocean currents dynamics, and we need to think on the way on that those information arrive to the people, on the coastal people, by applicatives on cell phones or by sites that they be aware about eventual problems and how to use in an appropriate way the biodiversity resources, the environment at the coast. And fishers in Brazil historically were designed by Navy to be the observers. They are not academics or managers' enemies. They are marginal people on the society that needs to be involved and to be a strong partner as observers. They have a strong interest, and they all knowledge that I saw here on the chat, on the talks, and on our group are very appropriate to take them to join us, like the first talk that we first chat we had here to introduce people, fishermen mainly, participation on those grounds. I think that it's a different public, but there is some opportunities. I think that the experience on the south coast of the United States is very rich. Sean was telling me about immigrants or indigenous people and well, common people that are already introduced on the USA society that needs to have different approach to use properly the information that we have. We just not have just the information, but we need to use them to return to the society's better use and sustainable use and productive use of natural resource. I think that we can think, all of us, on what are the main topics and to make some contacts. And after that, the Brazilian MCTI minister and NOAA can promote those joint activities. And well, after that, we need to find appropriate support, considering actual financial shortages to develop new activities, just like that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your comments. Being mindful of time, Katie, I don't know if there's any other high priority questions. Otherwise, if we're going to have a break, we're going to have to probably make it a little short. Do you mind, Katie and Karen, being over about 5 minutes if we give people till 10:30 to take a break?
I think that's okay. I would also just like to make one comment and just note that there has been really substantial discussion in the chat regarding how to engage fishing communities and indigenous people to help validate this information and really engage them in a meaningful way. And I just wanted to take note of that and share that around 11:30 in the US East Coast or 12:30 in Brazil, we're going to be moving to an open discussion period after the presentations. And this has come up several times, so I would like to invite Dr. Rita or others to bring it up again once we're back together discussing as a group after the 4 presentations today. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Terry, to start us off on the break.
Thank you for that, Katie, and thank you for noting that in the messages. Should be good conversation as we get towards the wrap up. So let's take till 10:30 Eastern time, 11:30 Brasilia time, and be back here. Please do not you don't need to disconnect. Just mute yourself or turn off your video if you wish, but do not disconnect. It may cause some issues for you. So I'll see you back in about five or so minutes. All right, welcome back. Hopefully we're getting people back to the meeting. Really good conversation, questions, comments, presentations. It's all been very good so far, and we're halfway through, and we're going to go to the next two breakout groups. And so for breakout group 3, we have monitoring and assessment on effects of oil on ecosystems, organisms, and humans. And I'm going to hopefully get the pronunciation right, but I can't guarantee it. But we have Ana Cecilia Zati Albugaria Barbosa to give the presentation from Brazil. Ana, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I will speak in Portuguese, that I think that is more comfortable to me, okay?
That's fine.
Can you see my screen? I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see it? Very well. I'm sorry, I couldn't do the presentation in the format required because I had a problem with my drive. And so I did just a presentation very next to what was required. Afterwards, I will share it in the right format. First of all, I'm going to show you what we talked about in break-up session 3 in group 3 on monitoring and assessment of effects of oil on ecosystems, organisms, and humans. I can basically say, on behalf of the group, we really took advantage of this meeting. More than 40 people were in this group. So different people from Brazil, from the United States, participating in the group. From different areas of the country in Brazil and United States. So we did take advantage of this meeting. I divided my presentation among the conversation that we had on Wednesday. First of all, we began our workshop talking about some presentation. In total were 7 presentations where we talked about sentinel organisms exposed to the microbiota, and here in Brazil with the oil spill in Bahia, ecology, toxic effects detected here in the northern part of Brazil, the human dimension of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the impact on marine organisms. They were all affected by hydrocarbon effects. So really it was very interesting. Rui talked about the monitoring activities done here in Brazil. So we did all these presentations at the beginning, and it was very interesting to hear all points of view. And then we came to some discussions and debates about future goals. Basically, the group had a consensus, the need that we have today of baseline data. What is talked about, that this baseline data has not been only based on environment, but we need data, baseline data on the interaction of human beings, of the contaminants and the environment that is not contaminated. We have to include all types of study areas that are already contaminated by oil or pH contamination, and areas that are contaminated with other contaminants, emerging contaminants among others, and study areas that are not contaminated. So how does the environment today, what would happen if there were an oil spill in the future? So we have to consider all these options, and also more regional monitoring. The need to establish, for example, a museum program here in Brazil, the need of monitoring program on contaminants. The data collecting of baseline was a consensus, and we also talked about the need to establish methods, intercalibration among labs, intercalibration of labs, establishing methods, central organisms to use marine microorganisms as sentinel organisms, other organisms too, to establish protocols for collecting, to have a standard of how this is done, that everybody does it in a standard way to collect data that is very important, and the best practices in the lab. Other thing that was commented was the access of information. We have to generate information that is available to the researchers and to the general public, and an engagement together with what is happening with the presence of oil and contaminants. And a general consensus was the need to do a meeting face-to-face in 2022, where we could better discuss these topics more calmly and doing more context and establishing better connections among us. Some topics were mentioned but were not discussed due to the lack of time. The definition of, you can see all the topics proposed for the discussion, but the definition of acceptable levels in fishing products, like in USA, use benzapirene, like the European Union says that some HPAs, what would be the standard to be used in here in Brazil? The use of organisms to define toxicology effects of, for example, DNA, the use of artificial intelligence too. So some topics were discussed, but the others were not commented. This shows again the importance of these types of meeting and the one of face-to-face in 2022. I would like to thank for the opportunity and congratulate the initiative of doing this meeting, and thank you Karen and Katie for all the support, for everything that was done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. I particularly focused in on the access to data and information. but also not just looking at the contaminants or the impacts of the contaminants on the environment, but also on the relationship to human beings and the environment. I think that's a very, very important part of this. I think it was good to talk about that intercollaboration of laboratories, the methods, the protocols, the sentinel species that are selected. There has to be consistency across, and hopefully that will allow for a more comprehensive application moving forward. And of course, I think your request for a face-to-face meeting, hopefully we're already on the way towards that for next year, so we can continue this conversation. And with that, I would like to turn to any of the participants that were in the working group 3, breakout group 3, that would like to provide comments. And Katie, have you received any requests? And then we can go to questions. If you're from the breakout group and wish to make supplementary comments, please request the floor.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Well, I made some appointments here, which I'd like to share with you all. That's like we are getting into the década dos oceanos, like the ocean decade. Please correct me if it's not the official name, but it means that in Brazil, when it's about take care, protecting the coast, the traditional fishers and the communities are our great guardians. It means they are the one living there with ancestral knowledge and the best people to help by monitoring. Of course, all the things come together like IT and satellites and methodologies, but we have to put more power into this exchange. Currently, I'm working with Professor Rita in the coast of Bahia, and we are trying to first of all, I am Priscilla. I studied journalism, social communications, and I'm dedicated to public communication and the scope of civil protection, like what we call non-police protection, means firefighter, civil defense, and all other humanitarian institutions. And we are coming to this point that the challenges and problems are global, but the real problem happens on the local level. And people on the territory are the first respondents, so to say. And in Brazil, we have this culture that we are always waiting for them to do something, but it's very necessary now. It's urgent now to give these people tools and ways to think their territories and to analyze risks and to think about operational plans and emergency plans, not big complex plans, but very rudimentary plans for those territories. And we are working on that right now. We are building a plan with the fishers that can be set on by the fishers. As a first response, it doesn't mean that these people will solve all the problems or all the solutions, but because when you are talking about risk management, we have this time windows, like you have to act within 2 hours, within 4 hours, 8 hours, unless you won't have food or water or whatever. So if they are always waiting, we lost these windows. So we are trying to work on a plan based on this methodology. It's called like critical infrastructures. But the point is how to communicate with them, for them to understand us as people, not like scientists. We're talking something that we don't get. How to make the right questions for them. so that they understand in their reality. So how to really get in contact. And the second point, there are plans in some locations or sometimes official plans, but people do not know these plans. But it comes when something happens to an occurrence, a disaster, what happens is that nobody knows what to do. So this is a very serious public communication problem that we have in Brazil at all. And we are trying to put this discussion into our project, just to be really very nice to collaborate with people like Professor Sham Rowe and other people here who would like to. So that's the point. Now, how to think about security, safety, how to improve this, because look, we are facing these global challenges, right? As Professor John Biden from the University of Edinburgh, he has this perfect storm theory. It means through modelings, he said 10 years ago, like between 2020 and 2040, we are going to face challenges that we never faced individually, and we will have to face it all together, like disease, food, water, energy. And the only way to solve these problems, like we people, we did that because we are too much on the planet right now and because our civilizatory model, but we are also the only one who has the ability or the chance to change things. And if you don't get to bring this, 3020 agenda down to the territories, so we won't be able to do this. And I think that's too much said. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Certainly it's really important to bring whatever we do that comes out of this workshop, make it relevant to the people that are living with it and living on the coast, whether it be in the United States or whether it be in Northeast Brazil. So making it relevant to people is so important. And that's one thing we hopefully we can continue to address as we move forward with our next iteration of our discussions in Brazil next year. Katie, do we have any further questions, comments?
I actually don't see any other questions in the chat at the moment, but anyone else is welcome to request to take the floor.
Could I make a brief comment? I don't see a raise hand option, so I'm just jumping in.
Oh, go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Jose Milbert. I'm all the way in south of Brazil. I was a member of Breakout Discussion Group 3, and we had a very good conversation. One thing that came clear is that although the groups, the breakout sessions were more or less narrow in scope, we still had a quite wide scope ranging from ecosystems to organisms and to humans. And I think that the human dimension is interesting because it has been coming up in all the different groups. So it seems to be a transverse issue, which of course it's the centerpiece of when you have an oil problem, when you have a perturbation problem, catastrophic event. This is the first point that I want to make, that it's very nice to see that the preoccupation in all the groups with the human dimension. It's an interesting aspect of that, and I think we should take that into account in the next event or in the breakout intersessional work. The other thing is that since we were dealing with monitoring, it's very important to stand out that monitoring, as I said in my introductory talk, it's something that we have to think in the long term, and it has to be embracing the different forcing factors and drivers that we want to monitor. So we have to discuss and see how we can implement that. And as I mentioned, I think you have a great experience in the US with the IUDS initiative, which actually embraced and involved the different agencies and participants that you have in the US making observations in the oceans in a very fragmented way, which now were put together under this umbrella. So think this is a topic that we should raise in the next discussion, round of discussion. Thank you, and it was very good to be a part of all this group of this fruit. This is the seed for future cooperative work. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jose. I think once again you're reiterating what we've heard: the idea of citizen science, of making sure we're connecting with the citizenry that are along the coast. You mentioned IUS. You know, that system is taking very disparate pieces, very regional focus observations, and bringing it together into a network. And so while it's serving the basic focus of the region, it also supports the larger national systems. And so there's a lot of lessons to share there. Carl Goldman, I think, did attend some of this. I don't know if he's attending today, but that is something that we could have further discussions about, as well as about the integrated ocean observing system in the United States and how it's set up. I did also want to go back to the previous comment just for a moment regarding the decade. I think Brazil, I really want to shine a light on Brazil, because they've really embraced the UN decade, MCTI and others. The regional workshop for the South Atlantic was held in Rio de Janeiro. I had the pleasure of being there. And so I really want to thank Claudia, Karen, and others at MCTI and for their embracing this, the Brazilian Navy and others. So just so there is strong support for that, and bringing it down to the people who are at the coast and who are the users will be important. But I did want to reiterate that. Katie, do we have any other comments or questions?
We do have another comment from Dr. Rita, and I'll do my best to share it accurately. But I believe she's mentioning that there was not adequate infrastructure for researchers to detect, I believe, HPA in fish, which had a negative impact on fishing families. I would like to invite any of the group members to respond to her comment.
Can I try to address this?
Please.
Well, in fact, what we had was some initiatives, some local initiatives by colleagues and labs that collected material and analyzed it for the concentration of PAHs. But in fact, we don't have, as Ana Cecilia mentioned, we don't have a limit or a degree, a limit of concentration of these substances as an ideal for food. And I saw Renato Carreira. He might address this as well. But I'd just like to add is that what we are trying to do, and Ana Cecilia also addressed it, is at least for a group of labs that joined in this task to analyze or make to do a monitoring program of fishes, crustaceans, and mussels, to have an intercalibration and to guarantee that the quality of the analysis are equal or are good enough to have robust results. But I ask Renato to add a bit more about it. Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Roy, for the opportunity. I'd just like to add that we face a big problem to coordinate all the laboratories that can make pH analysis in fisheries, which is not easy to perform. And I think that, as we mentioned, we evolved in this issue. We have network of laboratories that can work in collaboration, are working in collaboration. And I think that we have some developments in the future, but we have a lot of things also to do. And another thing is that we are trying to use other different indicators, including pHs in urine samples, like Rita mentioned during the breakout section, and also try to make pHs in hair, human hair, that we can have another perspective of exposure to pH in fisheries communities. Well, that's it. Just a quick comment.
Well, thank you, Renato and Roy, for your comments. Katie, we might have time for one more question or comment before we need to move on.
I am not seeing any more questions at the moment. Actually, I just saw a message from Dr. Villi from the University of Miami. She says, as part of the UN decade, we expect that Coast Predict, observing and predicting the global coastal ocean, is to be endorsed as a program, and the announcements will be made on June 8th. And it's relevant to the discussion. So I just wanted to highlight her point that you're welcome to visit coastpredict.org for more information about that project.
Well, thank you. It's good to hear. Well, if we have no further comments or questions, we can move on to our final breakout group, Breakout Group 4 on socioeconomic impacts, communication, science dissemination, citizen science. Samantha Dodwell from NOAA is the rapporteur who will be giving this presentation. And so I will invite Samantha to take the floor.
Thank you, Sammy. I just approved your request to take the floor. If you don't see the option to open your camera, you're welcome to hit refresh if you need, but you should have the permission now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie and Terry. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful.
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. I apologize. My internet connection is a little bit unstable, but hopefully it will cooperate with me here. So let me share my screen. One moment. Okay, fantastic. And can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Hello, hola, good morning. And I guess it's still barely morning in Brazil, so bom dia. Friends and colleagues, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Sammy Dowdell, and as Terry mentioned, I'm with NOAA. I'm in the Office of International Affairs. It is my pleasure and an honor to be here with you today to share a readout from our group's discussion. I'm representing Breakout Group 4 on socioeconomic impacts, communication, science dissemination, and citizen science. And as many others have already mentioned today, the topics our group covered were really cross-cutting themes that I think were discussed across the various breakout groups. So I myself am not an oil spill or socioeconomic expert, and while I will do my best to summarize our discussion, I would like to invite the experts from Breakout Group 4 to please jump in during and after the presentation to elaborate on any of the points that I shared today, as well as to correct anything if I happen to mischaracterize our discussion. We were very fortunate to be joined by participants representing a wealth of institutions across Brazil and the United States in our group, including the Brazilian Institute for the Environment and Renewable Natural Resources, NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration and Sea Grant Program, the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, the State of Washington Department of Health, and a number of distinguished universities across both countries. So our group, oh, apologies, let me change this slide. There we go. Our group aims to organize our discussion around 4 topics, as you can see here. Under socioeconomic cultural impacts, we discussed impacts on fisheries, community adaptation, perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors, as well as awareness and engagement. We discussed science to policy, where we talked about driving government action, establishing direct linkages, and working with government agencies. We spoke a little bit about community-engaged emergency preparedness, including involving the local community in contingency planning, response, and monitoring. And finally, we brainstormed about equity and inclusion, including disproportionately affected communities, recovery disparities, and inclusive communications. Of course, all of these topics are very interconnected, so our discussion meandered back and forth between these topics, but for our purposes, I'll use these to frame our discussion. So first, I'll start with socioeconomic cultural impacts. And we had a number of questions and research gaps that we focused on and kind of brainstormed about. Some of these we perhaps proposed some answers to, and others we just kind of threw out there as possibilities for future work. We talked a lot about baseline data, for instance, how we can evaluate impacts on local communities, even when we're lacking baseline data. We discussed how we can more effectively incorporate indigenous, local, and traditional knowledge in establishing baselines and in assessing impacts on communities. We talked about how we can accurately assess indirect impacts on communities and how we can differentiate between opportunists and those stakeholders who are legitimately affected. We talked about how we could prevent unfair economic practices during incidents. And one example was large seafood purchasers potentially using the guise of public participation to avoid paying fishers fairly for their products. And some participants along this vein suggested that this might not be a corrupt practice in and of itself, but perhaps an outcome of sensational or incomplete media reporting, a lack of consumer understanding, a lack of geographic context, and perhaps a lack of prompt seafood safety testing. We discussed how we can distinguish between impacts of an oil spill and impacts of other disasters, for example, COVID-19. We also discussed how we can effectively link oil spill impacts with socioeconomic impacts in communities. Some of our lessons learned included the importance of establishing socio-cultural economic baseline data and how critical that is for assessing disaster impact. We talked about how networks can be difficult to maintain if there is a long time between incidents, but there is a potential to share the network in relation to other natural disasters such as hurricanes. We talked about the importance of having long-term research programs to adequately understand socioeconomic impacts and to enable response and restoration of livelihoods. We talked about the need for a strong framework from the local to regional to federal levels with bidirectional communication, and how that's really crucial for effective gathering and dissemination of information, as well as preparedness for fast action and response to an incident. We talked about psychosocial assessments and how they're an important part of understanding communities' needs. We discussed how when science supports the safety of returning to tourism, consuming seafood, etc., there's a need to have a strong public campaign to disseminate the information and perhaps change public perception. And then finally, we discussed a little bit about even when perhaps a responsible party has not been identified, there's typically a need for government to take some responsibility for socioeconomic recovery and response. In terms of science to policy, we discussed a couple of questions, including what are the community needs that could be translated into policies, and which government tools and policies could best address such needs. Some of the lessons learned that we took away from our discussion is that there's a window of opportunity following a disaster where it's really possible to capitalize on momentum and build long-term resilience by establishing networks, repairing infrastructure, and other necessary response activities. We also talked about how it would be helpful for governments to publicize guidelines or best practices on community participation in oil spill preparedness and response. For community-engaged emergency preparedness, some of the questions and gaps that we discussed included: what are the best ways to reach communities during an emergency? What is the ideal communication flow between government agencies and affected populations? How can we improve the synthesis of existing knowledge to support stakeholders and help them understand oil spill impacts? How can we improve data sharing practices between government entities and other stakeholders, including the private sector, academia, civil society, et cetera? And how can we connect response and recovery actions to oil spill prevention as well? Some of the lessons learned that we discussed included that community engagement networks can be built bottom up or top down, and both approaches and models are valuable. It can be effective to use local connections with communities through extension or university networks as a means to bridge federal entities and local stakeholders. Traditional fishermen and other stakeholders have vast amounts of knowledge of local winds, currents, and waves that can prove really invaluable in preparedness and response efforts. I mean, we particularly discussed the importance of women in local fishing communities and how they're often an underutilized resource that could be accessed to help drive community engagement in citizen science and dissemination of information. And then finally, with respect to equity inclusion, some of the questions we talked about are: what are the best approaches to engage stakeholders, and how can we respect their time, experience, and knowledge? Some of the lessons learned and recommendations that we took away included the fact that it's really critical to include all stakeholders in preparedness and response efforts, not just those who are typically engaged, already engaged, or those recognized in the formal economy. We also discussed the fact that governments and other stakeholders could consider monitoring programs whereby local communities could act as observers. And we touched a little bit on some ideas for how to compensate or other recognize those individuals that contribute to observer monitoring programs. Participants in our group identified a huge range of research questions and potential opportunities for future work and collaboration. I think all of the questions and lessons learned that I outlined already could be opportunities for future work, but some of the specific goals discussed in our breakout group included interest in creating a common monitoring program for socio-cultural economic health indicators to establish baselines and draw connections between human well-being and nature. The need to improve our collective understanding of economic valuation methodologies for cities and communities impacted by oil spills. There was an interest in building partnerships so that we have strong networks in place pre-disaster so we can prevent political interference from hindering response. There was an interest in capacity building for participatory approaches, including sharing models for communities of practice and best practices for creating frameworks or networks. There's a need for support and capacity building in communities so they are able to have democratic participation in shaping policies that could increase that could increase their ability to respond to oil spills and decrease risk. And then finally, there was an interest in improving understanding of how to identify the most vulnerable and dependent groups and how we could prioritize their participation in decision making. So to close, I'd like to thank you all again for the opportunity to share a bit about our group's conversation. And specifically, I'd like to thank all of the experts who participated in our group. We had a really robust and rich conversation, and I learned so much from all of you. So thank you again. I would please like to invite all of you to jump in and correct anything I may have mischaracterized or elaborate on any issues of particular interest or opportunities for further work. And with that, I will just say thank you. Obrigada.
Thank you, Sammy. I found it very interesting as you went through your presentation on socioeconomic and cultural impacts. Especially resonated with me with the idea of oil spills, the oil spill impacts being measured against the economic impacts in the community, and trying to get a handle on that. in the science policy realm, looking at community needs, really, and I think it's very true that when a disaster hits, when something like this happens, you do have that window of opportunity and public engagement and political engagement that you can leverage, and so it's really important to leverage that while you can. In terms of community engagement, I think it's really important. You talked about the bottom up and top down. It's important that both are in effect. But it's all got to be also related to the local needs and also leveraging the local knowledge and understanding of the environment that they live. And finally, the equity and inclusion. I think looking at the different communities, looking at their structure, look at their culture, and then figuring out that it's one size is probably not going to fit all, and you're going to have to come up with different approaches for engagement. So with that, I will open up. Reach out to Katie to see if we have any comments. First, we want to get comments from any of the participants that were in the breakout group, if they want to add or provide additional information, and then we'll go to the questions. So if you are from a participant from the breakout group, you want to request the floor.
Can I suggest that Karin makes some comments, because she participated in our group, in this group, and she, as a representative of the MCTI, can have some interesting views or any comment on to build up on this very good summary that Sammy did.
Obrigada, Rui.
Thank you, Rui. Let us speak Portuguese then. I'm going to speak in Portuguese now. So I'd like to thank Sammy for the presentation. It was very um, complete, so we had a good perspective. And I think actually since group one that presented in the morning, we have seen the same issues being raised about the importance and the need also of developing citizen science, getting the target communities involved in co-designing and the research projects bottom up actually in this case. I think this is still a big challenge because of how science and academia and universities, how they work, and then how and fund the agencies, how they work. So a lesson learned for me from this discussion is to learn about Sea Grant. And I think this is a big differential, not only in terms of the research profile that they do, but also because they have a research agenda that's more related to the community since from co-designing all the way up. So I think this was very interesting. And I think this is a challenge for us to think for Brazil. How can we have a sea grant in Brazil? And so we can have this agenda so that we can get funding with proposals to engage the communities, to have citizen science from bottom up. I think this is my takeaway. This is my takeaway. I don't see the solution yet, but I think it's the beginning of discussion that we should have that cuts across many areas of knowledge. But for oil, this is a priority as next step. So I think this is something that we start now, that we have on our radar for us to put together this research agenda. And I think the comment that I have to add, it was a great report that Sammy has done actually. Thank you. So I'll continue in Portuguese. I'll continue in Portuguese now, me too.
We have actually shared the model of Sea Grant with other countries, and it has been actually embraced and developed in Korea. They have their own Sea Grant program. And there also is one called the Sea Partnership Program in Indonesia, modeled after Sea Grant. So they still made it their own, but we helped to provide the information, how to set up the program, to make sure you have all the aspects of Sea Grant. And I think our National Sea Grant College Program Office would be very interested in sharing that with MCTI moving forward. And Katie, are there any other questions or comments?
I don't see any questions yet, but I see a couple of comments that I would like to highlight.
Rui is asking, he's raising his hand. Rui,
oh, please go ahead.
Yes, just a little comment. I will continue, switch to Portuguese now. Então, Karen,
Karin, I just want to build on what you said about this aspect. So it was really clear this is a cross-cutting aspect for all the groups, which is the human dimension participating in science, and also as an important participant in research. But in the emergential action we had, I think you guys made very clear that this would be an important aspect, and I believe that all people that participated are going down this path, and that's why this has been discussed in all the groups from Brazil. That is really present, and this has to do with the tradition that the United States has with Sea Grant. So congratulations to you.
Comments. Katie, do we have any further comments?
Sure, I can share just a few. I also want to highlight that Sammy got a lot of positive feedback in the chat, which is great. So thank you everyone for your comments. First, I just wanted to share that Dr. Lamardo mentioned, quote, besides infrastructure, we also need people to work on labs. During the 2019 oil spill event, we had both difficulties, small groups, and not enough infrastructure to work on the issues, particularly regarding chemical analysis. I think that is an important comment, and I'll just highlight a couple of others perhaps, and then I'll open up the floor again. Dr. Rowe shared that in the US, we also have the problem that not all funding agencies understand how to review projects that have strong community engagement models to shape the research, because it looks a little different than our regular science when it's participatory and co-designed. So perhaps evaluating how we review proposals in order to make that a requirement or make sure it's valued in the review process. I think that's an important comment as well. I'll just share one more from Doug Helton, and then perhaps we can open up the floor again. Doug said, one of the challenges about citizen engagement is the safety issue. Many people want to help with cleanup, but that can raise even more hazards and waste management issues. But science to survey and understand the effects and the use of volunteers in a focused and managed cleanup, like with wildlife rehabilitation, for example, can be a great way to engage the public. And then we have one comment from Steve Morelsky as well regarding the, I think, somewhat recent oil spill in Israel. They organized 15,000 citizens to assist in beach cleanup, which is a very interesting comment as well, and it would be great to learn more about that. Okay, so I'd like to stop there and see if there are any reactions to those many very insightful comments.
Katie, Eu só queria compartilhar com todos que na página
Katie, I just want to share that say that in the folder for group 4 that's available, we shared many files and journals that have been published about we have communication, we have videos in the case of the oil spill in the United States, and these are great examples of how they have communicated. So I invite you all to look at this folder for Group 4 to look at all of these materials.
I'd like to just mention one more comment
Just-
from. Oh, please, Funny, please take the floor if you'd like. I'll come back.
I always, when I'm working, when I am in a workshop, I would like to have a kind of product, you know, what is the place that we are going to. I think that the human dimension is well understood by all the groups. I didn't see the other presentations, but all the talks were about it. And but one of the main challenges, I think, it's to each group to think what is the short-term importance, and also, of course, to the other time schedules too, medium and large in long term, but mainly the short-term contribution that each knowledge would be useful to coastal people. I was thinking what would be wonderful when some problems, no extreme events occurs on the coast or other places, when science can already had provided some solutions that is very fast to be applied to solve those problems. Generally, we don't have this. We don't try to foresee what will happen. It's just trying to, if it's possible, to reduce our current issues. I think that if we have some groups here that maybe the human dimension have a participant on each group would remind, you know, because it's not part of our cultural issues in US or in Brazil on engineering or biology or earth sciences to think on it directly. But it will be very useful to have communication skills, to how to solve short-term problems skills on each group. If we have this beginning of research, multidisciplinary, but with a focus on the development of plans, contingency plans for short and long-term actions would be would sound very good to Brazilian and US governments, and also will be us as academics very happy to have applicable solutions to our theoretical dreams. Just that.
Thank you for that. I mean, it sounds to me like you're getting more into being the proactive emergency response preparedness. And we'd have to probably bring in some additional colleagues for that conversation because while NOAA and other entities do provide information to support the scientific, the reaction, and they do the modeling, they do the prediction of where the spill will go, where it came from, the conditions. But then there also is that whole other part of the engagement, like with the U.S. Coast Guard and others that are actually responding directly to the oil spill and what protocols they have in place to actually engage, be proactive. So, yeah, if we did that, we definitely have to bring in some additional folks. So, any further comments, Katie?
I will highlight one or two more. I would like to mention a comment from Ronaldo Cristofoletti, who said, from local to global, what can we take away from this workshop, both strengthening our partnerships in our own countries and our partnerships with each other? What have we learned, and how can we link it to global agendas such as the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development? And I think that's a great comment as well. And Dr. Vili Carafelu also added that one of the goals of the UN Decade is to reach out to other sciences, to mix oceanography with social sciences and economics, which is really what makes that sort of work transformational. And Dr. Vijay John also just added that there's more information regarding these topics from the high-level synthesis and findings from the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative website. So you're welcome to visit that site as well.
Thank you, Katie. I really want to thank all the breakout groups for all the work they accomplished in such a short period of time. And there's so much that's been discussed and so much more we need to discuss, it appears. And we will continue that conversation moving forward. Great questions, great discussions today. And we're looking at the time, it's time to move on to the next session. So unless there's any critical comments, further comments at this point, we're going to move into an open conversation. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Karen at this point, and she's going to facilitate the next session. Thanks.
Thank you. Obrigada.
Thank you for this discussion session. We'd like to hear from you in a high level in terms of comments and suggestions about the format of this workshop, the process of this workshop, and about the possibilities and suggestions for our next step. As you all know, this is a different format for this conversation, where we had 3 days, but we know it was an entire week of immersion for all participants. With a lot of work in parallel meetings with groups and offline. And we also created a methodology to share files that has worked really well. So it is important for us to understand from you if there's any feedback or suggestion for us to improve in terms of format. And I want to talk about the next steps. Katie has shared with you that we are going to write a joint statement as part of a memorandum of understanding of science technology cooperation. So we're going to use your reports that are just great for for content. But we like to keep in touch with these specific groups, the 4 groups, so that we can work on future agenda, have ideas and suggestions for the future. So I like to have one person from each group that could be the person that we can interact from now on to to go over the joint statement for final revision review, and also discuss with the network future suggestions for the future. My suggestion is to have a representative from the United States and from Brazil for each group, so that we can have an executive group that can coordinate the communication in an appropriate way. This is a challenge. As you all know, we started with events that had 50 to 70 people, and today, this is the last day, and we have 170 people on this call. The videos of the first day and the second day are recorded, so this is in our channel on YouTube, so I'm sure that this is gonna be watched either in Portuguese or English by other colleagues, so we can add to this network. So I want to hear from you suggestions about how we can go about this in the future. And I'm gonna stop here to hear you, and I'll be taking notes. But before that, I know that we have Mr. Grussel, the Director of Technology Center of the Brazilian Navy, and I'm sure the Admiral Grussel wants to make an announcement. I want to just say that IBAMA, the Brazilian Agency for Environmental Surveillance, they have participated. Actually, they participated in the first and second day, but they're not here today. But they're very important players for this conversation and for the continuity of this network. Thank you. Over to Mr. Gurgurjo. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Karen. I'd like to wish a good afternoon to all the participants of this workshop. I am Admiral Gur Gurgel, a director of the Brazilian Navy Science Center in Rio de Janeiro. So we work on science and technology with the Brazilian Navy, trying to work on new technology is associating the academia and also the private sector in developing science. So we want to follow up and incentivize this collaboration between NOAA and Brazilian institutions. We feel that all that has been discussed this week is a world challenge, actually, especially for countries in the southern Atlantic, because according to some studies, there will be an increase of 300% of the transport freight in the south of Atlantic. So for us, for the Brazilians from Navy, we call it the Blue Amazon, the area that are under our responsibility. As a consequence, this will happen because the economic center will be migrated to Asia. So the spill that we had in 2019 has shown to the Navy in Brazil how important it is to have a prevention capacity and a follow-up capacity in and monitoring the oil source. So Brazilian Navy has been working on three pillars. The first one is to improve and enhance our Blue Amazon management system. This is a monitoring system that's strategic for Brazilian Navy, and this represents, as far as we're concerned, a system which is a system of systems with many tools. And by using sensors along the coast, we can also use tools with AI, satellite images to identify the presence of ships. And we also have monitoring of the sea, and we also have modeling. So by enhancing the system, we are planning to invest more in these in the systems. The second point was the creation in 2020 of a scientific technical committee that we call Scientific Technical Committee for supporting, monitoring, and neutralizing activities. And this is an attempt to have joint action not only with academia and scientists, but also with other institutions, federal agencies, and companies, trying to optimize detection and prevention of impacts or oil spills as we had in 2019, and also have responses for any other impact that we may have in the future because of oil in the sea. Jointly, as I have said, always focusing on having academia, the private sector to come up with immediate response to any problem. The Brazilian Navy has been proactive in supporting the creation of a National Institute of the Sea with the idea of coordinating efforts to play a leading role in solving national problems related to sea pollution, together with other national players, without losing sight of having continued effort that we make today in this committee that we have created. So I just wanted actually to make this summary about the Navy in Brazil and how we're trying to focus on these three actions. And I want to just say thank you and to show our interest to collaborate with NOAA and the MCTI in this action. Thank you very much, Karen. That's what I wanted to say. I was very brief, but I wanted to say that the Brazilian Navy values and tries to participate in these efforts, not only with MCTI, academia, and companies, and how important we feel to have this workshop with Noah to talk about this. Thank you very much.
Is it going to be in Rio, Bahia? I'm pretty sure a lot are coming together, yes. Very well. If there are not any more registered, we can carry on with our final discussion. I received here news that the group number 4 could be on the Brazilian area, and group number 1, like a focus point, Professor Paulo Nobre. Can we carry on like that? And during the rest of the day, we will receive any suggestions of focal points on each group so we can maintain a dialogue with all of you. If you are all registered in the list of this meeting, as I said, it could be we can expand to other collaborators and we can still increase the group. But the most important thing is to have the focal point in this process, in bilateral cooperation. So I'm going to leave that task for you in group 1 and group 4 in Brazilian area, and group 2 or 3 we are waiting, and also our colleagues in the United States to have focus point for the next days. We received a comment from Renato Ferreira sharing the files. These files will be shared with all of you on the next days. Just give us a week or at least 10 days, if possible, in order for you to have an access to everything that was shared. The site of the ministry and the program Science of the Sea, Ciencia no Mar, there's a repository of that information, and we can create an agenda to support that exchange of files, that sharing of files, or events that may come. We can share it on the site. But we can have an area specific, an area to be sharing constantly. We're going to talk about the joint statement collaboration. That's the first immediate task, defining the strategy areas we are working on today. And we can enter towards the next steps or activities that may happen among these different topics. From the ministry, we are very interested on developing that agenda to have a bilateral collaboration, but also to have an organized agenda on Brazil and United States cooperation. I can see that here in the chat there is a proposal to do. Sean Rowe, that would be in group number 4. Perfect. Group 2, Vanya is going to talk with her colleagues about group number 2, or the colleagues in group number 2. And therefore, we can go to a final session. Any comments or suggestions? Katie, you would listen to the translation? Katie, you weren't listening to the translation? You couldn't hear it? Estava agradecendo toda a equipe do Ministério. Também agradecendo a você pessoalmente. Foi um prazer trabalhar com você, Katie. E vou sentir muita falta de você e nosso bater-papo no dia a dia. Mas temos muito trabalho com as ações futuras. Gostaria também de agradecer a Carrie, Joe e todas as pessoas que nos ajudaram dentro desse processo para essa sessão, essa oficina de trabalho. Vamos manter o contato e vamos aguardar para ver quem é o representante de cada grupo para o seguimento, para os próximos passos. Para o grupo número 1, temos o Paulo Nobre, o grupo número 1. Para o grupo número 4, Priscila e Sean Rowe. E podemos aguardar a outro grupo para indicar quem vão ser os que vão seguir o follow-up, né? Vocês podem compartilhar, ter acesso a todos os documentos criados. Também podemos usar o sítio web como um repositório com respeito a qualquer outra informação que a gente precise. Ia passar a palavra para você para fechar o evento, para um encerramento. Gostaria de agradecer a todos vocês pelo seu trabalho de quase 8 dias, não somente 3. Muito obrigada.
We almost made it through with no glitches today, but hopefully everyone can hear and understand now. Thank you again, and thank you for your very kind words. And thank you to the Navy as well for speaking today during our discussion. It was wonderful to hear from the Admiral, so thank you for that. It's been a great week of discussions over 3 days. Thank you again to Karen for suggesting that we space out the workshop over 3 days. I think it was really nice to have time for the researchers to have those discussions amongst themselves on Tuesday and Thursday, and for our rapporteurs to have time to put together their reports and not have to rush or put in extra hours. So I thought it was a great flow, and thank you for everything you did. Karen has been working furiously for several days around the clock to put this together. And really, she did an amazing job pulling together so many Brazilian experts. I was so impressed by, just the sheer volume of interest and engagement from such a diverse group. And of course, thank you to those of you from NOAA and from the academic community, the Gulf of Mexico Research Institute, and nonprofits. We were really excited to see the diverse interest from our side as well. And we've had this idea for a few months, and we weren't sure how it would blossom and take off. And I think you've all surpassed our greatest expectations for the number of ideas that you have generated across multiple scales in the near term, but also in the long term. And I have to thank Karen again for her very gracious offer to host us in Brazil. I think the location is to be determined, but we're already eager and very excited to visit you. And thanks again for your leadership there and for the wonderful offer. We're really hoping that between COVID coming under control and the vaccines rolling out slowly but surely, we might be able to do it in 2022, potentially. Like I said, we just started talking about that this week, but we're really excited to stay in touch with everyone and share more details about the in-person workshop. And we could also talk about doing something virtual. I think one benefit of having virtual meetings is you don't have to worry about the cost of travel. And I think that really creates more opportunities for so many experts to participate, to sign up last minute if you heard about it closer to the date. and also for early career professionals and for students as well, to not have to worry about applying for a grant to travel. I think it's more inclusive in that way. So there are certainly pros and cons to having the webinar. Apologies again for the long delay on Monday, but I think overall it was great to have the operator and interpreters helping us throughout all of the sessions. We're really grateful for the support that we have had and the ability to use this platform and also make the meeting bilingual. And thank you again to MCTI for handling the YouTube live stream. We'll share the links for the recordings for Monday and Friday. You'll be able to find those in both languages, and you're very welcome to share those links. We're also considering posting the videos from Wednesday. I know we've been in touch about whether or not we can share your presentation. So they're not publicly visible right now. They are recorded, but they're not posted right now. So if you have an embargo, or if you would prefer to not share your presentation or slides, or just comments in general that you made on Wednesday in those private sessions, we can either hold the video or edit out those pieces of the video. Karen and I will be working on that. And they may be posted later, depending on how the editing goes. We'll be in touch about whether or not we're going to post those videos from Wednesday. Overall, we're looking forward to identifying those folks who can be the points of contact for the 4 groups. Thanks again to Karen for her great idea there. We're really looking forward to staying in touch. And I just think it's great that every group, I think, could have discussed for several more hours on Wednesday. I think it's a great sign that there's a lot to come. And the presentations today were absolutely fantastic. Thank you to all of our presenters. They were extremely thorough. And even though we did add that day of buffer time, I know it was still a very short turnaround to synthesize that large amount of information. And as was mentioned by several people, there were 4 distinct groups, but within those groups, they could have been broken up into 2, 3, 4 sections. So we will probably be working with you to organize task teams. I know I'm kind of running late, but the last thing I wanted to mention is just a special shout out to some researchers that sent me an email last night that there is an issue with some oil leaking off the coast of Sri Lanka. And because of our workshop this week, Chris Reddy and Emily Mang Douglas and a few others from the NOAA Office of Response and Restoration had actually met each other and networked this week and are now talking about potentially providing assistance to Sri Lanka. So I think it was really helpful for us, of course, to talk with each other. But at least on our side, I think it was great to actually meet other people from America who are working in the same field, who possibly had not attended a conference together before. So I think it was extremely beneficial for both countries for several reasons. And we have a lot to learn from Brazil as well. So it's certainly a really great collaboration. And we're looking forward to our next meeting together. So thank you to everyone. Karen, would you like to say anything final?
I think we are all good to go. We're gonna keeping in touch with all of you, and it's been great. So let's just call the closure and keep in touch via email and Google Drive and so on.
Definitely.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Wonderful meeting.
Yes, feel free to turn on your camera if you'd like.
Yeah, turn the cameras on so we can make a final picture.
Yeah.
This is historical. This is the beginning of a great, great moment of all of us. Let me see who else. Yeah, sure. 1, 2, 3, and go. Use your perfume, and there you are. Thank you very much. My compliments, Katie, Karen, Terry, and everyone. It's a great challenge and opportunity to be together.
See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
See you.
Thank you so much.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.